It's time for All Hands on Tech.
Climb on board as we explore all the amazing things happening in Nova Scotia's tech sector. Each episode, we'll chat with local experts to uncover the secrets of what makes Nova Scotia the best place for collaboration, innovation, and creativity.
All Hands on Tech is proudly produced by Digital Nova Scotia, the industry association for Nova Scotia's growing tech sector.
Welcome back to All Hands on Tech. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ashley. For this episode, we're talking about one aspect of technology that we don't often talk about here on the podcast, but is very, very important in our sector, tech law. Our guest today is the founder of a full-service law firm focused specifically on advising technology companies on both Canadian and U.S. legal matters.
Voyer Law's clients span tech startups to Web3 companies and video game studios. There's so much we can talk about here, so we're extremely excited to have you and the firm's founder here today, Kellen Voyer, in the hot seat today. Welcome to All Hands on Tech.
Thank you for having me.
We are, as I mentioned, very excited to have you on the podcast because we don't often get to talk about this subject. And I think there's so much that we can kind of tap into here. But before we kind of get to some of those questions, why don't you just give us a little bit of a background on your journey and what led you to establish Voyer Law?
What led me to be a lawyer? I started with an interest in technology way back in the day, and I figured out at some point I wanted to be a lawyer, maybe blame John Grisham novels. And then I figured out, oh, there's technology law. That's a thing. Mm-hmm. And that intersection of the two is really interesting to me. And I focused on that throughout my kind of education period. Went to law school in the U.S., just focused on doing work with startups and other tech companies. When it came back up here, kind of what we recognized early on was that California's population alone, forget the rest of the U.S., is bigger than that of Canada. So whatever you're doing, whether you're doing a software company, hardware play, what have you, there's going to be exposure to the U.S. market, whether you're hiring people or you're raising capital out of the U.S., et cetera. And none of the law firms in Canada do that in-house. They farm it out to other firms in the U.S. So for us, creating kind of an efficient process for providing legal services where we can do Canada and the U.S. in one location made a lot of sense with no one else doing it. So kind of seeing that market hole is what led us to do this, and it's kind of resonated ever since.
Amazing. So it kind of just came out of some interests when you were younger in technology, and that's why you decided to kind of focus on this for your law firm?
Exactly.
Very cool. Can you give me a little bit of background kind of on like when was Voyer Law founded? I'm just curious.
2011 now, I think.
Okay.
So we're getting up there. Yeah, right.
Very cool. Okay, well, we do have some questions for you prepared, but we want to get to know Kellen just a little bit more. So we have some rapid fire questions for you.
These weren't sent to me in advance.
Exactly. That's the point. All right, I'm going to kick things off here. First rapid fire question, and this is really a hard one, so prepare yourself. Mario or Sonic?
Mario.
Wow, so easy.
What about Xbox or PlayStation?
PlayStation.
Oh my gosh. Cabot Trail in the summer or the fall?
I've never done it, so do you recommend what? I'm going to go summer being the better one, but maybe I'm wrong.
I would say that would be like a 50-50 split, you know, depending who you ask.
Yeah, I would say the fall probably. It's just so
pretty. I say the summer.
And if you're doing like a hike, which is probably what you're doing out there, it's like nicer when it's a little cooler. Got the nice views.
There you go. We just answered his question for him.
I'm turning it back on you.
Yeah.
Okay, and what is your favorite part about living in Nova Scotia?
I think it's the people, actually. The whole friendly with your neighbors thing. Mm-hmm. It's very Nova Scotia.
Is it?
It's not a Vancouver thing as much.
So are you a better neighbor here than you are in Vancouver?
Probably. I've taken a bit of the Nova Scotia back to Vancouver.
Okay.
I do know my
that's
neighbors
good.
in Vancouver.
Just a totally different guy.
I'm way more friendly now.
That's awesome.
Question time.
We're into the questions here.
Let's do it.
Okay, so if you thought those were hard, here we go. So you said that you advise clients in both Canada and the U.S. As a technology-focused firm, what are some of the unique challenges that you encounter when dealing with tech-related legal matters on either side of the border?
The most common thing I deal with every single week are startups in Canada that read something online that said you should have a Delaware company. So they went and formed a Delaware company. Or Stripe said, because I think, what is it? One of Stripe services will give you a free U.S. company if you want to use certain Stripe services.
Oh.
And so they'll incorporate a U.S. company for you and not tell you anything about the ramifications of that. So we have a lot of clients that say, hey, we have a Delaware company, but we're all in Canada. And so that creates problems because if you have a U.S. company, but all the mind and management, to use the accounting term, is in Canada, then that U.S. company is really just doing business in Canada. So you have tax problems because you're paying taxes in both Canada and the U.S. You're not going to be double taxed, but you need to deal with that problem. So that's the most common issue we see, and it can be fixed. But I could go on and on about Canadians and why they probably shouldn't have a Delaware company.
Why Delaware?
Yeah, I
Like,
was
is that
gonna
just
say.
random? Like,
Because the internet tells them to. No, Delaware historically it's a very corporation-friendly jurisdiction.
okay.
Other states have caught up, but it has a very advanced set of, I guess, laws and case law that are very corporation-friendly and not as much shareholder-friendly. So companies like that, and the trend is followed to this day.
That's so interesting.
Hmm.
Wow.
There's nothing wrong with California or New York, but if you worked with a venture fund, they'd say, no, you have to be Delaware. And that's just bottom line. It has to be that
Oh my
way.
gosh. A hot tip.
So I guess it sounds like there's a lot of maybe misinformation out there, and that's kind of where,
I think the things that rank highly outside of my blog post saying why you shouldn't do this,
yeah.
that ranks very highly too. But I think there's a lot of information about where should I incorporate my startup is like the Google
Right.
query.
Right.
Okay.
And then Delaware immediately pops up. And there's also this impression that if you're an American company, magically you'll get American money, as if VCs search for startups just based on where they're incorporated or something. I don't think that's the case. I've always
Right.
contended if you have a good product, then people will throw money at you. Techstars and Y Combinator, the two big incubators in the industry, used to care if you were a Canadian company. Now they don't. So I think that reflects the fact that where you're incorporated matters less than what your business is. And I think as well, it's the thing we advise most of our clients. So you can start in Canada. If early on some venture fund says, no, you have to be a U.S. company, we can fix that. But don't pigeonhole yourself by starting in the U.S. and you miss out on a whole bunch of tax credits, both personal and corporate, that you could have preserved if you had stayed Canadian from day one.
So for all those tech startups that are listening to this right now and are about to submit their, Delaware proposal or whatever, what should they do? What do you tell your clients?
I'd say, well, if they're in Atlantic Canada, I'd say maybe incorporate federally or Nova Scotia. We can get into the details of that, but incorporate in Canada generally.
Okay.
And then that'll preserve a bunch of tax credits you'll probably want. And then if you need to have a U.S. entity because you have investors telling you that, then we can fix that in an early stage. But if you don't have any U.S. exposure, you don't have any physical presence in the U.S., then I would say start in Canada. Because as I said, you got to preserve those things.
Right.
You don't get to incur extra costs. As otherwise, if you have a U.S. company on day one, then you have to register that one as doing business in Canada, pay taxes in both countries,
Right.
and pay two sets of lawyers or us or two sets of accountants to do tax returns for you every year in addition to a bunch of other problems. So it'll save you a lot of money at the start.
I can barely do my taxes
I
as
know.
is. I would take that advice.
Yeah. That's good advice.
It's free advice, so take it for what it is.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I mean, we could talk about so much here, but I mean, we have a tech lawyer on the podcast, and I think we'd be remiss if we did not talk about what everyone's talking about, which is artificial intelligence. So obviously the rise of AI and automation will have a major impact on pretty much everything. So from a legal perspective, what are the key legal and ethical considerations surrounding AI adoption?
I think as a lawyer, what interests me is how I know people in the industry are using it. Like I know people in the industry that use it to audit all of their code. So they'll work on a code base and run that through ChatGPT and check it for bugs and things like that. So I'd be first interested about confidentiality issues. If you're using it as part of your business flow, yet you're giving ChatGPT or whoever you're using all of this data,
Right.
it's probably creating various confidentiality issues because you're giving them all your info. So to me, that would be a big one. The other one we're seeing a bit in the writer's strike is tied into this a bit, and the actor's strike is ownership of things generated by AI, whether it's images, whether it's voice, whether it's an entire part of a film. Who owns that? Because in the U.S., at least, potentially that can't even be copyrighted because it's not original work of authorship by a person. It's generated by the AI. So I think that'll be an interesting challenge as well for ownership and for the law generally.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
Is there any way that it can help out kind of what you do on the legal side, or is that something you don't even touch?
I've wondered about that. I mean, I don't want to give ChatGPT all of my documents because
Right.
then it's going to make better documents.
Yeah.
I think for us in training our team, I don't want them to be reliant on AI, just putting in a set of variables, filling out a form, and then it's automatically generated, because I think you're going to miss out on a lot of nuance. So while we have some standardized documents, we have them read through them every time, because once you read through it, you'll recognize a way to refine the document, or you'll think, wait a second, this client situation is slightly unique and I should change this clause a bit. So I don't want to be reliant on it at all. I think it can create some efficiencies like in incorporation and stuff like that. But I think going to the nature of, will it take my job? That question. Or all of our jobs. I think that if all you do as a lawyer or other service provider is like basic stuff that AI can replace, I think you probably need to change your business. But any lawyer could set a company up for you. At least if they know tech companies, will set it up right. But the value, I think, is that the extra advice you provide, the conversations you have about someone's business that might surround what's otherwise a basic process that add value. And I don't think AI is conditioned to provide that kind of advice.
That's fair. And also, I think some of the feedback on AI is that it scrapes the internet, right? Not everything is true on the internet. So it's not like scraping, the actual law. Like, it's going to take some truth and some false narrative and kind of paste it together. So that's kind of the dangerous game with AI, at least at this stage, right? So
and I'm no lawyer, obviously, but it's not like law is not black and white, and like you said, everything is super nuanced. Every kind of, I'm thinking more from a criminal side, because that's what I'm more like exposed to. But everything is super nuanced and like individual, so you can't even like apply the same brush on any case, I think, would be fair to say.
It can produce, if you said write an employment agreement, it can write a framework thing, but it's going to miss a lot of nuance of local law. There was a case in the U.S. where a lawyer used ChatGPT recently to draft all of his pleadings to court. And so it wrote it up, it cited all these cases, and then he actually asked ChatGPT, are these real cases? It said yes. And it turns out they were all made up cases. But he filed it with the court and never bothered to audit ChatGPT's work. And obviously that didn't go down well for him.
That is a tough look.
No kidding.
That's a bad day.
So don't trust ChatGPT if it says, yes, it's real.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
what I'm
it's
saying.
true.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Use with caution.
Yikes.
For sure.
All right. So, with technology, AI is such a good example of how fast things evolve. How do you stay up to date on the latest advancements and their legal implications?
I asked ChatGPT.
It comes full circle.
Full circle. I'd say our clients keep us up to date to some degree, because some of our clients are doing really novel things that are under the radar. So you'll face that as an educational point. For me, generally, it's just staying up to date on technology through all the different usual sources, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Reddit or something else, or Wired or something like that. But the technology is one thing, but you're always applying it in relation to something that already exists. Like, I think a lot of technology has some limited corollary, something that it's similar to in the real world already. So I think there's some value in, yes, you need to understand the tech, but you also need to understand, I think, what it relates to that already does exist, because that's going to govern how it's governed under the law and things like that in the first place. Do
you play any role in, I know there's a lot of conversation around, they're passing laws and the government, is putting all these things in place. Do you play any role in that from like an advocacy standpoint, or do you kind of stay out of that and just roll with whatever comes from that?
I roll with it. I'm not a lobbyist, but I think the government is always slow, especially in Canada, to address changes in technology. The U.S. is always going to be leading the way, both in case law but also regulation on new tech. It's a bigger part of the economy there, and they're more they used to be more responsive. So I'd say for us, we're not involved in that, but we do follow trends out of the U.S., and we assume that those trends in the U.S. are going to be pretty instructive for Canadian companies. And they have to follow the U.S. laws anyway, so they need to know about them if they have U.S. exposure.
Yeah, fair enough.
Since we're talking about, technological advancements, I'm curious, like, how have you seen the industry, and how has your job, how has it affected your role in like since 2011, since you've had Voyer Law?
Trying to think. DocuSign, while it's simple,
Right.
it's so simple, that has been a very nice game changer. Sending things out and people accepting DocuSign as a method of signing documents. But you'd be surprised. For people that do real estate, we don't do really any real estate, but I know like in real estate deals, you can't use DocuSign half the time. So I'd say for us, DocuSign's been a great efficiency. And then for us, we actually have a lot of custom tech built for us to do certain things. So just having the skill set among people we know to generate tech for us has been helpful. because we have kind of unique applications that we're trying to solve for. So that's how I see tech in our business. But we're very digital based, so no paper.
Well, that's interesting because I feel like, well, at least from my perspective, I feel like, especially when you see like the lawyers roll into court with their like
Ooh, the
boxes
bag.
full of documents.
Yeah, the
you
rolly
know?
bag. I've
It's
got
like-
one.
Yeah, it's like you just kind of think it's a bit more of like a slow adopter to digital, I think, as an industry. And maybe that has to do with like cybersecurity issues as well. So I don't know. It's just interesting.
I think it depends on the firm too, because
Right.
some firms are very antiquated in their systems.
yeah.
And I worked at one of the big firms in Canada, and they didn't even have standardized templates.
Wow.
And you would think that everything would be standardized. There'd be like a Word doc that you couldn't touch, but it would be your template. No, everyone had their own style and things like that. So I think it's driven on the firm side. And then for us, we like to use tech as a big part of our business because obviously being in tech, we have to understand it and
Right.
deploy it. Otherwise, our clients are going to wonder what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I kind of want to go back to talking about tech startups a little bit because they often face some unique legal challenges. And I think a lot of that comes into intellectual property protection. So I'm curious, at what stage would you say that a startup should kind of seek legal advice or, start thinking about protecting their property?
They need to start thinking about IP protection on day one because the common problem we face is that they've created this tech and they've got a team of a couple founders and they just think magically their company owns this IP because they own the company, but actually the company owns nothing. You need to transfer it to the company. It's a pretty basic process, but that is often missed and that can get problematic where a co-founder departs and they made a third of the code base and there's no written agreement between them at all transferring it to either you personally or to the company, and you need to chase somebody to button down that IP. Facebook had that problem with a whole bunch of contractors way back in the day. So you want to button down the IP in the sense of who owned it and transferring it to the company. If you're doing something that could be patented, software patents are difficult to get, so that's up in the air. But in the hardware space especially, if you start to disclose your invention publicly, you may not be able to get a patent on it at all. So
Really?
yeah, so there's a lot of disclosure issues that you may have if you start taking your thing you want to patent and giving it out to all your friends.
Right.
And so for us, it's about telling clients, kind of keep your mouth shut until you've talked to your lawyer about protecting your IP rights, especially if you're considering the patent side of things. And that applies more to hardware, but there may be some plays on the software side too. And then I guess for other companies, startups love their name. Video game clients definitely love their names. And trademarks are now first come, first serve in Canada and the States. So if you don't file your trademark pretty soon on your game name or your company name, someone could file the same thing and you could potentially never get it.
Right.
We have a client that we told this to, and they spent a fortune on a video game and then realized somebody has the same name.
Oh, no.
And they got to figure out a solution to that, and it costs way more money to fix it than it is to file in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
You said first come, first serve now. Was it not that way before?
Yeah, I'm not the IP guy in the firm, but it didn't used to
Okay.
be that way. It's a relatively new change in the grand scheme of the law.
Yeah. So do you find that tech startups often know that they should be no? Is this like a common?
The tech startup people, and rightfully so. I think many people that are good at a particular business, they don't know about the legal side of it.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on the accounting, or a construction guy isn't going to know about the law either, whatever your
Right.
business is. So these are all issues that can be generated. I think it's important to do your base research.
Right.
Some clients do that, but whether it's reading blogs or something else, just understand the different issues, and it's pretty well documented what you should be focused on as a tech company, as we've kind of touched on here on day one, what you should button up.
And you have a good resource too. You have a blog.
I have a blog. Thanks for the plug.
Yeah.
The blog's got all of this on it, so voyerlaw.com.
Perfect. Yeah, you can go find out more because we're just kind of scratching the surface here, but you've got a wealth of knowledge there, which is great.
All right. So, in your experience,
Yes.
since we're talking about your experiences, what are some of the most fascinating and unique cases that you've handled and lessons that can be learned from them? I feel like you've been alluding to them. So, give us some of the dirt here on some of the most unique experiences you've had.
I think the unique clients to work with are always the hardware companies. No offense to software, but hardware, you're often dealing with a really unique business. Like we have a client that does drone aerial reforestation.
Oh.
And that they were the first company to do that. And we did all their contracts for drone forestry, which I don't think anyone done in the world before. So it's kind of
Very
fun
cool.
Cool.
to do that. But going back to that point earlier, people have done aerial reforestation for years using helicopters and things. So
Right.
when we work with companies like that, you just tend to look at what's similar in the past. We have another client that does inserts like a Dr. Scholl's, but full of circuitry that measures how you weigh your body. And they have like MLB players using it. And so if there's an issue with that, obviously the cost could be huge. So
Yeah.
facing challenges like that with a client when you're drafting legal agreements and how do you address those risks is always pretty exciting too. But tech isn't as exciting as maybe being a criminal lawyer. But we did have one client once that called us and they said that they had sold shares accidentally to a mobster that had just been released from prison. And a member of a well-known crime family in New York. And they said, so how do we get out of this? We already spent the money. And so that was an interesting situation in how to apply non-legal and legal skills to deal with the
that's
issuance of
fun.
shares to
Yeah.
somebody that
Oh, that's fun.
you don't want to piss off, to be honest.
Yeah, they probably didn't think it was that fun.
Yeah,
No, but there's a unique situation for
That's
you.
a good one.
that is a good one. Yeah,
That's a
you
good
came
one.
prepared. Yeah, because you deal with a lot of your clients span, as we said at the beginning, tech startups, Web3 companies, video game studios. But I guess you would take clients that are not necessarily in the tech space as well, right?
We try to focus just on tech companies. If they're a relation, one of our current clients, we might, do it. We don't want to say no to someone we know. But my view is that everyone has particular expertise, and you learn a lot just focusing on a particular market. So those people that just do real estate law know way more than I ever will about real estate.
Right.
And the same thing for us. We just do tech, so we understand that industry. We understand the trends, whether it's financing rounds and what term sheets look like now in the current environment versus when the market was hot. So that kind of expertise, I think, is why you'd work with somebody that just focuses on a particular industry. So we try to do that. We do get some work just U.S. only. We don't advertise that, but people do call us up for just U.S. specific work because not many people in Canada do it anyway. So we will do that if you want to reach out on that point. But we try to, at this point of the business, and it's been 11, 12 years of it, just stay focused on technology industry or ancillary to the tech industry companies.
Yeah.
Are most of your clients located in Canada?
I got to do the math on that. I think at least 70%
Okay.
are in Canada. The rest are in the U.S.
Yeah.
And some in Europe and Asia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I mean, from like tech is growing. So I imagine, and you want to grow Voyer Law as well, right? I think you want to.
That's what yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me a little bit about some of your like expansion plans.
My expansion plans. Well, we are expanding into Atlantic Canada. We've been here
Yeah.
for a year now. So we have an office in Halifax, staffed by myself and Haley on our team. So I've always viewed Atlantic Canada as an emerging tech market. If we looked at Vancouver when I started, doing a business like what I do in Vancouver with more than one person just doing tech seemed far out of reach. And it turned out that you can build a firm of 7+ people based in Vancouver focusing just on tech. And I think the Atlantic Canada market is growing as well. There's been a lot of immigration. I know that's a touchy subject among certain people out here, but there's been a lot of immigration to Atlantic Canada. And I think it's been beneficial to the growth of the tech sector.
Yep.
And I was talking to some big Canadian venture capitalists, and I brought up this thesis of mine that this immigration and a bunch of other kind of more youthful population changes out here is going to lead to growth in the tech sector. And they had the same thesis as well. They were focusing on Atlantic Canada as a fund, and they saw that the ceiling, the size of the market, obviously is not going to be as big as in Ontario or Vancouver or Quebec, but there's still plenty of market opportunity here to focus on that particular sector. And so I think there's a lot of people now looking at Atlantic Canada and its technology sector.
That's what we love to hear.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say
Music
the
to our
exact same
ears.
thing.
We actually paid him to say that. Yeah.
I can make the check out too.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of our questions, so the floor is really yours. Is there anything that you would like to add or anything you'd like to share, anything exciting coming up at Voyer Law?
Anything exciting? No, I'm a lawyer. Nothing is exciting. I just
Hey, you've got
process
some mob
documents.
cases.
The mob story. We need more mob stories.
Yeah, right. More mob stories. No, it's all kind of the standard fare for us, but we're excited to work with more Atlantic Canada companies. So hopefully we can build a broader network out here and support the growth of the industry.
Perfect. I guess this is a place, too, where we can say, where can they find you?
They can find me at Voyer, Voyer law.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to All Hands on Tech. Interested in learning more? Visit us on our website at www.digitalnovascotia.com. We'll see you next time.
This
has been
a Podstarter
production.